With a meticulously crafted lie, I stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror in my Cheongdam-dong penthouse, a space so cavernous and silent it felt more like a mausoleum for the living than a home. Outside, the Seoul skyline was a jagged teeth of glass and steel, biting into a bruised purple dawn. Inside, the air was filtered to a sterile perfection, smelling faintly of expensive ozone and nothing else. A tailor knelt at my feet, his fingers trembling slightly, a tremor he tried to hide as he adjusted the break of my trousers with surgical precision. My reflection was a study in cold, calculated perfection. Every hair was lacquered into a sharp, obsidian wave. My skin was clear, pale, and as bloodless as the Carrara marble of the foyer.
I looked like a man who had never sweated, never hungered, and never felt the sting of a genuine emotion. I was the crown jewel of the Kang Group, a beautiful monster sculpted by 3 decades of ruthless expectation and the crushing weight of a family name that owned half the city's horizon. "The chairwoman expects the press release by noon, Director," my assistant, Minho, said from the doorway. He didn't look up from his tablet. He didn't need to. He knew I was a machine that followed the schedule, a clockwork heir wound tight by the iron hands of my mother. To Minho, I wasn't a person. I was a quarterly report in a bespoke suit. "The charity visit," I murmured, checking my watch, a Patek Philippe with a tourbillon movement that cost more than a mid-sized apartment in the suburbs.
The ticking was the only heartbeat in the room. Remind me why we chose Hope House instead of the National Museum Gala. The lighting at the gala is far more forgiving for the quarterly report photos, and the guest list is actually relevant to our interests. The branding team suggested a boots-on-the-ground approach this year, sir. Public sentiment toward the conglomerate is at a historic low following the labor disputes in Ulsan. The headlines are calling you the Ice Prince of the Han. They want you to look accessible. Accessible. The word felt like ash on my tongue. In the stratified neo-Confucian hierarchy of Seoul's 1%, accessibility was a weakness, a jagged crack in the armor that invited the vultures.
I didn't want to be accessible. I wanted to be untouchable, a god in a glass tower. But in the high-stakes game of corporate succession, perception was the only currency that mattered. We arrived at the center in a 3-car convoy of black sedans that looked like a funeral procession for my dignity. The neighborhood was a relic of old Seoul, a place the economic miracle had forgotten. It was a labyrinth of narrow, sloping alleys where tangled power lines wept with frost and the heavy, nostalgic scent of roasting chestnuts mixed with the acrid, biting exhaust of aging buses. As I stepped out of the car, the freezing Han River wind whipped at my cashmere coat, trying to find a way to my skin.
I looked at the building, a squat 3-story brick structure with peeling paint and windows that seemed to squint against the harsh winter sun like tired eyes. This is where I'm supposed to find my humanity for the cameras, I thought, my lip curling in a private, reflexive sneer. I pushed open the heavy oak doors, and the first thing I felt wasn't the warmth, it was the assault on my senses. The smell was earthy, pungent, and sharp with the scent of fermented bean paste, scorched ginger, and the steam of 100 boiling pots. It wasn't the sterilized, citrus-scented air of my office. It smelled like life, messy, unrefined, and terrifyingly loud. And then I saw her. She was standing on a wooden stool in the center of the chaotic kitchen, reaching for a heavy crate of oranges.
She was tall, her skin the color of rich, dark espresso, wrapped in a vibrant headscarf of green and gold fabric that looked like a defiant middle finger to the gray, monochromatic Seoul winter. She was laughing, a deep, melodic sound that cut through the clatter of pots and the shouting of volunteers. She was sharing a joke with an old man whose face was a map of 1,000 wrinkles, his hands gnarled like the roots of an ancient pine. She didn't see me, or if she did, she didn't care. To her, I wasn't the director of a multi-billion-won empire. I was just another suit in a room full of people trying to survive the cold. "Director Kang,
Director Choi, the center's head, came rushing forward, her heels clicking frantically on the linoleum. "Welcome, we are honored."
Please, stay right here. The photographer is setting up the lighting by the soup station. We've prepared a clean apron for you, one without any stains, of course. I'm not here for a photo shoot, Director Choi. I lied. The practiced silver tongue of a CEO sliding into place with oily ease. I am here to serve the community that sustains the Kang Group. Of course, but perhaps just a few shots of you holding the ladle? It shows leadership, it shows warmth. He can't hold a ladle if he's afraid to get his sleeves dirty. The voice was like a bell ringing in a quiet room. I turned to see the woman from the stool. She had hopped down with the grace of a gazelle, her movements fluid and unburdened.
She was looking at me, not at the tailored lines of my suit, not at the shivering, sycophantic entourage behind me, but directly into my eyes. Her gaze was a challenge, a level of eye contact that was almost scandalous in its lack of deference. "I beg your pardon," I said, my voice dropping into the low, predatory tone that usually made board members wither and secretaries apologize for things they hadn't done. "You heard me," she said, wiping her hands on a white apron that had a defiant smear of red gochujang on the pocket. "You look like a man who's afraid of a little salt. I'm Ife. If you're here to work, the loading dock is full of Napa cabbage that needs to be moved into the cellar before it freezes."
If you're here for the photos, stay in the lobby and try not to trip the people actually doing something. Curiosity. "Minho," I said, my eyes locked on Ife's. "Cancel my 2 p.m. and the 4 p.m. In fact, clear the day. I'm staying." The next 3 days were a descent into a world that felt like another planet. Ife didn't give me the dignified jobs. She didn't let me hand out blankets to the elderly or a smile for the local news cameras. Instead, she put me in the kitchen, a humid, cramped space where the steam from massive vats of yukgijang ruined the press of my $5,000 shirt within 20 minutes. "You're doing it wrong," she said on the second day. She reached out and grabbed my hand. Her skin was warm, burning even, compared to the icy, conditioned air I was used to.
She adjusted my grip on the heavy kitchen knife. "If you cut the onions like that, you'll lose a finger. And I don't have time to drive a chaebol to the ER. I have 60 seniors waiting for lunch, and the rice cooker is acting up again." "I have been trained in many things, Ife," I snapped, though my pulse was hammering against my ribs from her proximity. Cutting vegetables was not among the curriculum at Oxford. I was busy learning how to manage global logistics. "Clearly," she replied dryly, a small, knowing smile tightening at the corner of her mouth. "In Lagos, even the wealthy sons know how to help when the fire is hot. Are you less than a man because you have a driver and a personal chef?" I looked at her then, truly looked at her.
I saw the exhaustion etched into the corners of her eyes. I saw the way she checked her phone every hour, lingering on photos of a family thousands of miles away in Nigeria. She was a software engineer by trade, a high flyer in the tech world who had come to Seoul for a contract. Yet here she was, scrubbing floors and chopping garlic in a basement. "Why stay?" I asked, my voice losing its corporate edge. "You're an expat. You're successful. You could be on a beach in Bali for the holidays. Why spend your leave in a drafty kitchen in a city that barely acknowledges you?" She stopped chopping. For a moment, the mask of the silent survivor slipped, revealing a profound, echoing loneliness. "Because in this city, I am often seen as a resource, or a foreigner, or a problem to be solved," she said softly, her voice thick with a sudden weight. "But in this kitchen, no one cares about my visa status or the color of my skin. They just care that the soup is hot and the belly is full. It's the only place in Seoul where I feel like I'm not being watched by 1,000 judgmental eyes. It's the only place where I'm just Ife." I felt a pang of unexpected guilt. I had been watching her since I arrived, but not the way the others did. I was watching her because she was the only thing in my life that felt three-dimensional. "I'm being watched too," I confessed, the words feeling like a betrayal of my station. "Every move I make is calculated for a stock price." "My mother doesn't see a son. She sees a legacy. I don't think I've had a meal I actually enjoyed without thinking of the optics or the calories or the social standing of the person across from me in 3 years. She reached out and handed me a slice of cold, crisp pear. Eat this. Don't think about the Kang group. Don't think about the cameras. Just taste the fruit, Kang-Jun. It grew from the earth, not a spreadsheet. I took a bite. It was sweet, crisp, and shockingly cold. For a fleeting second, the beautiful monster vanished. I wasn't a director, an heir, or a prince. I was just a man, standing in a kitchen, eating a piece of fruit. The conflict erupted on the 4th day. I arrived to find the just ruler in me being tested by the very world I had built.
Director Choi was in the hallway, her voice hushed and panicked, clutching a phone like it was a live grenade. Yes, Madam Chairwoman, I understand. It is unsightly for the brand. I will handle it immediately. Please, don't withdraw the funding. My stomach dropped. My mother, the woman who viewed the world as a chessboard, and me as her most powerful, yet most expendable piece. I walked into the kitchen and found Ife packing her bags. Her movements were jerky, her face set in a hard, stony line that reminded me of the statues in my mother's garden. Ife, what's happening? You should go, Kang-Jun, she said, refusing to meet my eyes. The director suggested I take my holiday early.
Apparently, a certain powerful family thinks a foreign volunteer is a distraction and a bad influence on their golden son. They don't want the wrong kind of person in the background of your charity photos. It ruins the purity of the brand. The rage that filled me was volcanic. It wasn't the cold, calculated anger of the boardroom. It was something hot, visceral, and ancient. This wasn't about a merger or a hostile takeover. This was about the one spark of light in my gray, sterile world being extinguished by the cold hand of tradition and optics. She has no right, I growled, my fists clenching at my sides. She has every right, Ife countered, finally looking at me, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. This is your world, Kang-Jun. I'm just a guest.
I forgot that for a second because you were being human. But at the end of the day, you're the CEO who lives in a glass tower, and I'm just the girl from Lagos who doesn't fit into your mother's vision of what Korea should look like. You belong wherever you stand, I said, stepping toward her, ignoring the grease on my shoes and the smell of soup on my clothes. This experiment is over. I looked at Ife. I looked at the guards. I realized that my entire life, my silence had been my consent. Every time I had let my mother dictate my life, I had been building my own cage. If I walked out that door, I was confirming everything Ife feared, that I was just another ghost in an expensive suit. I'm staying, I said, the words echoing off the tiled walls like a gunshot. Sir?
Minho asked, stepping forward, his face pale. The chairwoman, she was very specific about the consequences. Tell my mother that the briefing is happening here, and tell her if she wants to discuss the future of the Kang Group, she can bring an apron and start peeling the garlic. I have a debt to pay to this center, and I intend to settle it. If she withdraws the funding, I will fund it myself from my personal dividends. All of it. Christmas Day arrived with a soft, heavy snowfall that blanketed Seoul in a rare, hushed silence. I walked to Hope House through the fresh powder. I had no entourage. I had no driver. I had left my phone in the hotel safe. For the first time in 31 years, no one knew where I was, and for the first time, I knew exactly who I was.
I found her in the main hall, hanging a few modest strands of lights. She turned, and the shock on her face was worth every billion won I was likely losing in my mother's revised will. "You're still here," she whispered, her breath hitching in the cold air of the hall. "I'm a man of my word, Ife. I told you I had a debt to pay," I said, stopping a few feet from her. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small sprig of mistletoe I'd bought from a street vendor on the way. "I did some reading," I said, my voice uncharacteristically nervous, cracking for the first time in my adult life. "I'm a man of laws and corporate traditions, but I'm told that this plant holds a certain power, a law that transcends even the Kang Group." I held it over our heads.
Eve looked up at the green leaves, then back at me. The gaze between us was no longer one of a predator and prey, or an heir and a volunteer. It was the gaze of two survivors who had found a raft in the middle of a frozen, indifferent sea. "Kang-Jun," she breathed. "The scandal, the press, they will try to ruin you for this. They won't understand." "Let them," I said. "I spent my life being a beautiful monster for a ghost of a family. I'd rather be a man for you." I reached out, my hand trembling as I cupped her cheek. Her skin was like warm silk against my palm, a stark contrast to the winter air. I felt the heat of her, the vibrant, pulsing life of her. "May I?" I whispered. She didn't answer with words. She reached out, grabbed the lapels of my coat, and pulled me down. The kiss was the first honest thing I had ever done. It tasted like the spicy soup we'd labored over, like the cold winter air, and like a future I hadn't dared to dream of while sitting in my penthouse. It was a kiss that broke the chains of my upbringing, shattering the marble statue I had become. When I pulled back, the world didn't look gray anymore. It was in high definition, vibrant and terrifyingly beautiful. "I don't know how to be a normal man, Ife," I whispered against her lips. "I don't know how to live without a schedule or a board of directors." "Well," she said, a mischievous, beautiful glint returning to her eyes as she wiped a stray tear from her cheek. "You can start by helping me carry the turkeys to the oven."
They're heavy, and you've got those broad shoulders for a reason, don't you, Director? Or was that just the padding in your suits? I laughed, a sound that started deep in my chest and filled the room, a sound I didn't recognize as my own because it was filled with joy. I took the heavy tray from her, our hands brushing, sending a spark through me that no stock market surge could ever replicate. The conflict wasn't over. My mother would wage war, the tabloids would scream, my inheritance was a flickering candle in a storm. But as I looked at Ife, standing in the heart of a humble charity center in the middle of a Seoul winter, I knew I had finally won the only deal that mattered. I was no longer a king of a hollow empire. I was finally, truly, alive.